Welcome back, everyone, to one of the many shows reviewing the saddest island since Lord of the Flies. And
I like that one.
we got a Lord of the Flies this time. Deiveson Figueiredo and Joseph Benavidez had what could technically be called a fight, but not really. And joined, as always, my co-host Danny Martin. How are you
Hello,
doing, Danny?
folks. Oh, it's super good. A little apprehensive for this week's preview, but I guess we'll get to that in a minute, won't we?
I mean, we have not a ton to review this time, as I mentioned. Calvin Kattar and Dan Ige had a more spirited contest than many of us would have liked. Davis and Figueiredo and Joe Benavidez did not have a spirited contest. And we have Whittaker Till coming up. And we're going to end it off with one of the questions from our patrons on Trevor Wittman and the kind of fighters he produces. That probably won't be long, but we do have some more content regarding that coming up in the future. So this is just going to be pretty short. But yeah, we're going to start with the reviews. So where do you want to start, Danny?
I think we could probably spare a few words on Benavidez Figueiredo. I don't know if there's a whole lot to say that we didn't say the first time around. Um,
Pretty much.
this was really sad. It was not that much fun to watch, even as we are big Figueiredo fans. It was not fun to watch Benavidez just get knocked on his ass with every clean shot that Figueiredo landed. I would have actually been much happier with the first contest being kind of the end of this discussion because it felt not only was it definitive, but Joe I actually thought had a pretty credible performance in that fight. He looked pretty sharp, like he had a lot of good ideas with his striking. There were a lot of exchanges that he was doing quite well in, as Makovsky said when we had him on the show. Benavidez's ability to throw, three punches and then four punches and then five punches in combination and, eventually drown guys. It was exciting. It was a thrilling fight, and there was nothing to dislike about it. This one was just abusive. I really, again, I struggle to understand the matchmaking. And I think the Max Holloway Volkanovski 2 fight gave us a little too much, it gave us a little too much optimism for fighters making a comeback against a really tough matchup. This is more akin to what we what you should expect in these types of bookings. Yeah, I don't really have a lot. I'm thrilled to see where Figueiredo goes next. I'm down for Perez, Kai Kara France. I'm down for who else is that? Brandon Moreno. Whoever he wants to fight, I'm here for, and I'd really like to see Joe B retire because I don't want to see him get beaten up anymore. Sriram?
Yeah, pretty much the same place. I mean, there were adjustments that I think Figueiredo made. I'm not really sure about it because, this time, rather than the rear hand, right hand counter they did the first time, he turned it into a bit of a check hook this time. But most of it was just Joe B seeming physically diminished, at least after that first knockdown, and just didn't really have much for Figueiredo this time. Which, I mean, it's rough because, as you mentioned, the first fight, it was one of my favorite fights of the year. It was absolutely brilliant. Both guys did a lot of very cool stuff. This one, it was just a mugging. It was child abuse, and I did not like it. But yeah, I mean, regarding where they go next, I'd really like to see Figueiredo Yan at some point. Probably not now because, double champions are kind of a scourge. But if Figueiredo, and Flyweight's not terribly tough to quote unquote clean out, I think Figueiredo can. You've got Askar Askarov, who also won on this event. You've got Alex Perez, and you've got Brandon Moreno, and there are some guys coming up, but they probably won't be there before the division is cleaned out of top contenders. So if he faces two of those, I'd be fine with him moving up. As for Joe B, big step back, I'd be fine with him facing Pantoja or something, or Holly and Paiva, but I don't really think he needs to fight any more than he has. He's an all-time great already, and that's pretty much all there is to say.
Yep. I'm down for Figueiredo Yan, but I do agree you need to give it a little bit of time. Yan has to fight Aljamain, and fuck knows if they're gonna make that fight. Yan has some bantamweights to keep him busy. Figueiredo has some flyweights to keep him busy. But I'd love to see that fight down the line, and I really do I sort of feel a little bit about Figueiredo how I felt about when Cejudo won the belt. I'm I will be thrilled to watch him fight just about anybody. And I don't think there's any matchup that would be uninteresting. And I think that for guys to beat him, they'll also have to be really crafty and really smart to get around him. So even if Figueiredo does drop a fight to someone that we maybe don't expect, I think it'll take a lot to get there. for that opponent. Like it'll take an insanely committed and disciplined performance. So I'm super down for any one of those, but yeah, I'm still pretty bummed about Benavidez. I did not like seeing that go the way it went. But again, that's all I got. What's our next one that we got to recap? Is it Kattar Ige?
Yeah, I mean, Ige, it was fun. Not bad.
Yeah, it was fun.
Ige impressed me.
Yeah. I was kind of shocked that Ige hung in there. And he actually did give Kattar some issues early. Like we've probably credited Ige for this in the past, but like he is not an extraordinarily deep fighter, but he's a crafty fighter who knows what he's good at, and he's willing to try different. Like he has good ideas. So, the sort of quick blitzes to hit the body. Kattar doesn't really have much of a check hook to stop guys from just sort of, blasting in on him. He, had a decent job working his jab. Kattar isn't, defensively the best fighter in the pocket either, especially when you can start combining threats. Like, it was a lot of good ideas. It was just sort of the firepower and the skill disparity was too wide to bridge. But like I said on Twitter, I am now interested in a lot of different matchups for Kattar because I sort of wonder like if more elite guys in this division are going to be able to compile threats in such a way that can throw him off his game. Like I'd be interested in seeing if someone like Josh Emmett has the ability to close distance very, very fast on Kattar, hit his body and go upstairs, and just sort of shock him with speed in a way that Dan Ige never was going to. Like there's matchups like that are interesting. But overall this one was also felt kind of open and shut by the end of it. I think Ige's best hope was to either start super fast or just compete as long as he could, and it seemed just wasn't quite enough.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. I think Ige fought a very specific, smart fight in terms of someone who's A, not very good going forward, and B, someone who's very high guardy. Because, I mean, Kattar, he's a lot of his defense, he's a good counterpuncher in general, but he's not defensively the best in terms of like body attacks. Zabit got to his body because most of his defense is like a high guard. It's a solid one, but Ige, put together body head combinations. He did a good job staying out of the range of Kattar's jab. Did some southpaw stuff later in the fight, I believe. But yeah, ultimately I think Kattar, he fought a very good 5-round fight. He was more body attacky this fight than I think he's been before, and this would have helped him a lot against Zabit, and he didn't do it there, so that's questionable. But he paced himself. He attacked the body a lot early and fairly often with the left hook. And in general, it was just a big difference in terms of, firepower and in terms of skill in the pocket, how quick Kattar's combinations were, how sensible they were compared to Ige, kind of not being much defensively. And I think Ige, considering that he used to be like a forward-moving kind of power-punching brawler, this was a very good adaptation because that Ige probably would have gotten chewed up quick. But this one, he gave Kattar a good fight. And I'm pretty interested in Ige against a bunch of guys too now. I think Emmett would give Kattar some trouble with, the blitzes and stuff, but he's also way more jabbable than I think Ige was here. Because, Burgos got away with a bunch of jabs, and pretty much everyone's jabbed Emmett at will, so I think that could be trouble. But other than that, yeah, I think both guys have interesting matchups moving forward, and both are pretty solid top 10s. Kattar's probably a top 5 at this point.
Do we want to mention the featherweight matchmaking? Because we were talking about that a bit in the morning.
Yes, it's
weird, right? It's
very
weird.
Bad.
Because so here's the thing. Here's what's bothering me. To me, it almost feels like that people look at Max Holloway and Alexander Volkanovski as like the only two featherweights that exist in the top 5 right now. Does it feel that way for you? Because it feels that way for me. We have Brian Ortega, who hasn't fought in almost 2 years. Zabit did beat Kattar, but he hasn't fought since November. Yair hasn't fought in, a number of months as well. And keep in mind, none of these guys are like taking fights. Like we've had a lot of stuff rumored, but nothing has been scheduled. Korean Zombie, same thing. Like Frankie Edgar is ranked number 7 for some reason, like one notch above Kattar. It's weird to me because I don't want I don't want like every contender to just fall to like Max. Like it's just the onus is on him to like determine who's a top 5 fighter and who's not. And I sort of feel like that's how they're like trying to book these people. It's like no one's even mentioning Brian Ortega. It's like, it's not, and that's not if Kattar were to beat Brian Ortega, that wouldn't be insignificant, right? Like that would be a significant win that would mean a lot for him.
For sure.
Um, it's just it's odd. Like, and I there's a chance they might do Kattar Volkanovski, which I guess that's fine by me. I'm not a fight that I'm ever gonna pick Kattar to win, but like he certainly deserves it just based on his activity and how willing he has been to take fights. But I am very confused by how they're running it. It's very strange to me how they're organizing their rankings because Shane Burgos is now below Ryan Hall, and Josh Emmett is ranked a little bit higher now, but beating Shane Burgos the way he did, in fairness, probably should have him ranked above someone like Brian Ortega at this point. Also should have him ranked probably above Yair Rodriguez at this point. Like I don't understand what they're doing. And so it's leading to like a really stacked division to have a weird amount of stagnation. Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, it's very appropriate that like our very first episode was pretty much all talking about the rankings, and now 20 episodes later we're doing the same thing because the UFC simply will not improve. And I think that's the thing. It's Ortega and Korean Zombie are linked to a fight, but that fight doesn't actually make any sense. And Zabit and Yair are linked to a fight, and that fight does make sense, but it's not actually seeming to be happening. So you've got like people who are unavailable but also available because they're not actually doing things, but it looks like they're doing things. And just everyone below them is just like they have a ceiling on them that they probably shouldn't, because it's like, oh yeah, he's number 4, but he's going to be fighting soon, even though he hasn't fought since the last presidential term. It's gonna happen, guys. Believe us. And
you had a good point where you're like, Brian Ortega slapping Korean Zombie inadvertently kept him relevant in a way that his actual fights weren't, which is hilarious because you're right.
Yeah. He slapped the translator, and now everyone's like, oh, give him Korean Zombie. That's a punishment. Who's punishing him? The punishment would be Calvin Kattar. This is a reward.
Yeah, a punishment would be like to have him fight someone lower.
Yeah.
Like if you had Ortega fight like, I mean, I don't know, Arnold Allen or something. Like if you actually had him fight someone who was a lot lower ranked and you kicked Ortega out of the top 5, but by like, hyping up a fight but with another top 5 opponent who would obviously, if Kattar were to win that, or sorry, if Ortega were to win that, he'd probably get a title shot off it. Like there was actually kind of a genius move on Ortega's part to keep himself relevant.
It's John Jones tier public relations.
Yes, like that was really like, that's really smart. And I don't even like unintentionally smart work by Ortega to keep himself relevant. But I don't understand what they're doing or why they're doing it. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. And I get the sense, I had this feeling that Dana, because Volk Max 2 was razor close, I think Dana can look at, he's in the position where he has the authority to say like, that was a robbery, and he'll have people who listen to him. So there is a chance that they might just like that they're probably going to treat Max like the champion and treat Volk as a little bit of an afterthought. Like think about this. If we did Kattar Holloway next, and let's say Kattar won, I mean, the natural progression would be a title shot, right? But if they did Kattar Holloway and Max won, then you kind of have Max stealing all the momentum of these up-and-comers. And, like, he's sort of, he's still sort of the one who's defending the title, if you will, that doesn't actually exist because he doesn't have it. And instead, like, I still don't really think Dana knows what to do with Volkanovski, because I think he doesn't look at him as a particularly marketable champ. I don't know if he thinks he's that exciting. So he's sort of like, like, what the hell do I do? And
Yeah, I
so
mean,
it's impeding the matchmaking to a bad degree. Like I don't there are so many good fights to make at featherweight, and not all of them come back to Max Holloway is the point I'm trying to make.
yeah, I mean, Max is kind of in the place where like TJ was after the Cruz fight, where you're going to have a bunch of top contenders who could get title shots getting shots at Max. And Max could like treat those as quote unquote title defenses if he wanted, but it just doesn't make any sense in this case because Volk definitely had an argument to winning. Probably, in my opinion, more of an argument than Cruz did over TJ, but that's like it's close enough that like it doesn't really matter. But that's the thing. In Volk, he actually does want to fight contenders, unlike Cruz. So what you're getting is Max kind of acting as like a funnel where no one's going to get through Max probably in the near future, including Kattar. As much as I love him, he's probably not going to get through Max. But now Volk is all Volk is going to have is contenders like Korean Zombie, who like Korean Zombie, his last win was Frankie Edgar, and before that was Hanato Moicano, no one relevant in the division. So it's a weird division to be in right now, and that doesn't even touch guys like Allen and Ige, who are on like 6, 7 fight win streaks, and it took them that long to get near the top 10.
I think the crazy it's almost like they're just afraid to make fights. Like I don't know, and again, we have to all of this is sort of framed within COVID is obviously impacting this to a big degree. But Kattar's already like fought twice. Max has been active, Volkanovski just fought. But just like based on activity, it's almost like activity means more than your actual wins and losses in this division. As long as you just stay active and have a decent winning percentage, like you'll eventually find your way up the. Well, actually, that's not true because we have Shane Burgos who's ranked like 13th. I don't know. Maybe that's just the exception that proves the rule. I guess the thing I'm trying to say is like it seems that the UFC is afraid of matchmaking this division. I'm not exactly sure why, because they're not. They're not making. You could make Zombie Volkanovski. Like that's a fun fight. Who wouldn't want to watch that? You could make Ortega Kattar. That is a match that makes sense and it's competitive. And if Ortega wins, it puts him in a good position in the future. If Kattar wins, there's no denying he's the number one contender. He's already 13 years into his career. He's like if he's making a run now and he's got to do it. If you wanted to do Yair Zabit, I mean, that sounds a little weird, but okay, I guess that makes sense. Or fuck me, Arnold Allen versus Yair makes some amount of sense. They're so limited with how they're running this,
Yeah,
and I kind of hate that.
it's kind of like, yeah, I think you kind of get the sense that they like have a bunch of quote unquote stars in the top, and not really, but like Ortega has like the Modelo thing, and Yair has Mexico, and Zabit has Russia, and Korean Zombie has Korea, obviously. And you're like, I don't want any of them to lose. I want them to stick around here as long as possible. So rather than like give them anything to work with, it's just like sit on top, just wait. You got this, man. I'm like, it's really
it would
dumb.
make a lot of sense if they were actually like that would actually make sense if they were having Volkanovski fight those guys consistently. But the first match they made was Volk Max 2.
Yeah, that's true.
Anyway, we should stop here because we could talk about this literally all day. The point is like I don't really understand the way that they're running this, and at a certain point, like yes, it's significant that Zabit, beat Kattar when they fought, but Cater's the one who's continued to fight and is still winning, and Zabit is not doing anything. So at a certain point, like just activity tends to upend wins and losses in that sense. So, anyway, we've burned a little too much time on that. Moving on to the point, like why we're here, the main point of discussion. Robert Whittaker versus Darren Till is on Saturday, and it is the main event of a pretty gosh darn weak fight card.
It's big, but it's bad.
It's really not that good. But this is a pretty significant main event, and I don't know exactly where I stand. So I'll let you start this one, Sriram. How are you feeling?
Yeah. So I think Robert Whittaker is a pretty interesting way of looking at how the UFC works, because if you look at his introduction to the elite, it started out as like a weapon against Jacare Souza, and now he's given all he could with the Romero trilogy and Adesanya, and now you've got the next guy coming up, Darren Till, who's being used kind of as a weapon against him because Whittaker's not active and he's not particularly marketable anymore. So it's pretty sad for Robert Whittaker if he loses this fight, but I kind of think he's a pretty awful matchup for Darren Till if he's still there. It's just that form is the biggest concern here. So starting out, Robert Whittaker, I think we all know a ton of things about him. Defensively, terrific, brilliant offensive boxer in the pocket, solid kicker from the outside, but not great with kick defense. Anti-wrestling A++. He's a known quantity for the most part when it comes to his prime. But then you've got how the Adesanya fight went, which could be interpreted in a number of ways. And Darren Till, you've kind of got the opposite, where he started out not looking particularly great. And then you had the Woodley fight where he looked particularly not great. And you had Masvidal, where he looked very good, but you had the flaws that could rear their head against Whittaker, right? You had the fact that he's not particularly comfortable counterpunching someone when they're like able to cover their entries. Even when it's like big, violent, committed entries, it's just he got feinted out of his pants and kicked a lot. And you see some weaknesses with a Whittaker matchup there, especially since he got sparked out by a left hook, and Whittaker does those very, very well. But then you've got Gastelum, which, I mean, and a Gastelum win at this point doesn't mean a ton, but he looked very thoughtful there. And a middleweight Till isn't uninteresting because he's a solid puncher. He's not a great finisher, but he's a solid puncher. He's very quick. There are some attributes there that make some sense. Like, in terms of trajectory, you kind of have to lean Till. But in terms of skill, I kind of have to go Whittaker, like, just on presumption. I'm going to go with Whittaker, but, like, there's some stuff to talk about here.
Yeah. The thing that there's been two sort of prevailing thought strands for me in thinking about this fight. And one of them is I've made very evident on Twitter. I really struggle to pin down exactly how good Darren Till is because he's had such a weird career. Is that okay to say? I hope so.
That is.
Like he had a couple decisions. I mean, he drew with Nicholas Dalby in his second fight. Okay. And then he had the sort of, people consider like the breakout win against Cerrone. And then he had that really weird fight with Stephen Thompson that I don't know if he really won, but he was also the only one who really did anything. Did nothing against Woodley. Kind of got comprehensively solved by Jorge Masvidal. And then he fought Kelvin Gastelum, who looked just completely uninterested. And so I really do have difficulty like pinning down how good is this guy? Like how good is Darren Till really? Because he's had such bad showings at the end of his tenure at welterweight, and his end of fight at middleweight, it was a smart performance, but it didn't blow me away. It was actually kind of a back foot punching clutch type game, which worked. And he hit some nice elbows off the break. He actually seemed to be comfortable using his size at middleweight. He had more success kind of tagging Kelvin on the way in, which I guess is something to look out for. But I feel like I have no idea of like exactly how good he is. And he had one moment of success against Masvidal, and then mostly just got pretty much figured out. The other sort of thread that I have in my brain is I think a lot of your analysis in this fight, you collectively, the audience, a lot of your analysis in this fight is likely to be colored by how you viewed the Adesanya fight. Whether you thought that was... was that a one really, really, really bad match for Whittaker where he just wasn't able to adjust at all and his opponent just had a perfect read on what he was going to do the whole time? And so, even in some of the smaller, tactical exchanges, Whittaker could have some success, but in a broad strategic sense, he was making all the wrong moves. And it was just, like I said, Adesanya just went in and just had a complete read on him. Or was that a kind of a confluence of disaster for Robert Whittaker, where you know, he really hasn't had a lot of front to back clean performances in going on a couple years now. His knee buckled early against Romero the first time, and he had to kind of fight his way out of a hole. In the second fight, he got pretty badly hurt on a number of occasions. And I think was lucky to escape with the decision. And then Adesanya just kind of mopped him up. One knockdown at the end of the first round and then another knockdown, and that was it. So was that and then obviously we learned stuff about Whittaker later on. We learned like his overtraining situation where he was just going 7 days a week and just completely burning himself out. Obviously we know about a lot of his injuries and his pullouts. And he has not been a very consistent. Just getting him to the cage has just not been consistent. Like he's had like a year break for in between his last two fights, and then the more active one was 2017 where he beat Jacare and then beat Romero. But that's 3 years ago. So that's like all that stuff you kind of have to consider. As far as the technical side of this matchup, how much do you think Whittaker's approach in the Adesanya fight could actually come into play here?
I think so. I think one thing that you noted about Whittaker going to after the second Romero fight is that Whittaker's not really much of like a game planner in terms of broad. Like until he got his leg screwed up by Romero, he didn't look like a particularly smart strategic fighter. And I think the way that works is that Adesanya kind of frustrated his initial approach. He did some very smart angling off as Whittaker entered. He really, really made it difficult for Whittaker to find any first shots and combo off those. So he frustrated Whittaker, and Whittaker turned into less of like the, short, blitzy combo guy and more into like, I want to get in there and just beat you up until you die type of guy without being a pressure. So he was just like, he entered, Adesanya took the angle, and Whittaker was just like swinging at air while Adesanya was next to him. So it was a bad performance in a sense, but it was also not something that I'd expect Darren Till to replicate just in terms of that frustration that Whittaker felt. Against Gastelum, Till did some smart things. He angled off on the back foot sometimes. He framed off Gastelum as he entered, or off his own 1-2. He leg kicked a lot. Those are things that could give Whittaker some trouble, but I just don't expect Till to have the kind of distance management that Adesanya does, the kind of head movement that he did with, the leaning back off the overhand right and like pivoting off, and the counterpunching, honestly. Till's a defined counterpuncher for a lot of people, but his counters, they're kind of one note. He does the hop step straight that Conor McGregor does, hence the comparisons. And he's not particularly comfortable counterpunching someone who's like actually fine at making entries. So we're looking at someone who's like a counterpuncher in name, but I don't really see him counterpunching a Whittaker in good form, where Whittaker, he can feint in and set his entries up. He can jab against southpaws and stuff. He's very good at staying defensively responsible on entries. And entry is basically where Till does his best work, not really on exits, and that's where Romero caught him in the second fight. So I don't really see that being a route for Darren Till. It's a fight where Till has to strategize a lot to find even a little bit of success. And I'm not sure he's going to strategize at all for this one, just because Gastelum was a fight where he notably felt nervous and didn't want to be there, and he fought tentatively, and it worked because Gastelum is Calvin Gastelum, and Robert Whittaker is something completely different, at least in his prime.
Yeah, I think the Masvidal and Thompson fights for Darren Till are pretty they feel pretty telling to me, like in the sense that Darren Till is not particularly good at disincentivizing or even dealing with blitzers. Because there were times when Thompson would kind of blitz in and throw like, combinations, either like head body or just head. And Darren Till would just either just kind of back straight up. Um, he would try to lean to get out of the way, but they weren't like educated leans where he was, drawing guys out the way that Adesanya did, and then was able to sort of take advantage of these big over exaggerated swings. He's just trying to get away. I guess that's kind of what I mean, not just his resume, but like his actual toolbox. I don't really know how deep Darren Till's well goes. Um, because so much of what he does is sort of built on threats, but he's not like he sort of looks like he's going to be this massive kicker, and he doesn't really kick that often. He wants to counterpunch, but he's not actually that good at dealing with, guys who give him, guys who enter on him. I think the Gastelum fight in some ways was kind of a band-aid for a lack of counterpunching from Till, in the sense that instead of trying to counter Gastelum on the way in, he just smothered him, and just sort of tried to clutch off of his opponent's entries as opposed to trying to counter every single one.
Yeah,
and that actually
badly
seems
cosplayed Leon Edwards.
Yeah, it was a little bit like a discount Leon, wasn't it? And that might work. Like, that may not be such a bad idea. Whittaker's Whittaker's very strong in the clinch, but that Adesanya did that a bit as well, where he actually he would kind of grab the collar tie. He would, slip a strike as he's leaning out, and then as he's sort of recoiling, coming back to his stance, he would grab a hold of Whittaker, hold the collar ties, and then angle out as Whittaker was still trying to throw. So there's something there for Till. My biggest thing, I don't even know if for Whittaker it's like chin that I'm worried about. I know a lot of people have been talking about that, and I realize he took a hellacious amount of damage against Romero in their second fight, and then kind of got consummately finished by Adesanya. But I don't even know if it's that so much as I just really don't trust Whittaker physically. Like he started to look a little bit winded at the end of the first round against Izzy. And for a fighter who I think relies on, I don't know, just attritional damage, but he tends to need his pace. That was kind of something that he weaponized against Romero in their first fight and in their second fight. Was just the fact that he can keep a pace. He can set a pace. I don't know how much I actually trust him to keep his own pace at this point. He's just looked ever slightly a little bit slower, a little bit more exhausted. Like the defensive moves just look a tiny bit more labored. Whittaker is, he's not Max Holloway in terms of cardio. I realize he can't just go all day. He gets tired like everybody else. But it's the fighters who sort of set a pace that they can't keep that worries me a little bit. And again, but you sort of have to funnel this through. Like, he was fighting Adesanya, who is also a great pace fighter in his own right. Darren Till does not keep a pace. Like, he's like a famously low output fighter for the divisions he's in, which is in part of the reason why I've been so confused why he's generated so much of a following. You know what I mean? Like, one of the reasons I'm still sort of
the cowboy fight.
Yeah, I'm just sort of confused. Like, why did this guy generate so much attraction amongst fans? It's like he's often not even that much fun to watch. Anyway, Darren Till does not really push a pace, and Whittaker should be, if Whittaker knows what's good for him, he should try to. But I don't know how much of a finisher is Robert Whittaker these days. I mean, he's been fighting really tough competition.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's kind of what you have to look, because the head kick that he landed on Romero in the second fight, for instance, that would have finished everyone else in the division. And he didn't really get to hurt Adesanya, but, that's less of a function of like punching power / finishing instinct, and more he can't land on Adesanya. So I think Whittaker's still a pretty solid puncher. He's a very tight puncher in exchanges. He's very crafty in there. He's good at landing his left hook, and that's generally what's given him finishes like Brad Tavares. And Tavares isn't super durable, but it's the kind of blind short shots that tend to finish guys with him. He's still pretty good at sneaking his head kick behind his right hand. You've got a ton of tools there that like catch guys completely off guard. He's not like he's not like a Paulo Costa or Yoel Romero, but he's powerful enough that you have to respect him. And I think this fight might go all 5 rounds if Till just, concedes to the low pace and Whittaker just lands a couple shots here and there. But I think my worry is just, it's the same as I had with Dustin Poirier against Dan Hooker with Robert Whittaker. It's that more than looking shot right now, it's that I have to be worried that he's in a position where he's going to look very, very bad in the near future. And with Whittaker, it's like 100 times worse. Because with Whittaker, he's taken a ton of damage in the last 3 fights. He's also gotten injuries. He's also gotten sick. He's also burnt out. You've got it really couldn't get any worse going into this fight in terms of like how to project where he is. So even if he's like still there mentally and he still knows what he's doing, it's rough to see him breaking all his limbs, them all falling off, and still beating Till like he did to Yoel Romero. Like, he's getting older. He's getting deeper into his career. He's accruing more mileage. It's as I said before, I kind of have to pick Whittaker on presumption because he's better, but there's like a ton of circumstances here that I really can't account for.
Yeah, and that's kind of why I wanted to preface this whole discussion. Was I was like, it sort of depends on you, right? It depends how much you really take from that Adesanya fight. Yeah, I'm with you. I don't think I'd pick a 2014, 2015, 2016 version of I wouldn't pick that version of Robert Whittaker to lose. But I just hate fights like this because I have no indication of where Robert Whittaker is other than he almost got killed like 4 times in his last 2 fights. And that's hard to, it's hard to put a lot of faith in that, right? Like, the thing that bums me out is the fact that if Darren Till wins, I feel like the takeaway for a lot of people is just that Robert Whittaker can't beat strikers, and I don't think that that's much of a fair analysis. My thing is more just, I don't know if I've said this on the podcast, but I'll say it here, is that the karate boxer style of fight, it's, if you're going to make that your style, it's a pretty athletically dependent style, and it has a certain degree of there's a certain degree of risk with it. Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah. You are sort of relying on fast, deceptive step-ins where you can close distance quickly and then immediately angle out. And I'm not knocking Whittaker's skill. I think he's, he and Horiguchi are still the best examples of this, but there is a high degree of risk in that if you, with Horiguchi, we saw if you get timed on entry, you can get your head blasted off because you are closing down guys very, very quickly. And you may be compromising your position, or you just run onto a colliding shot. With Whittaker against Adesanya, we saw if you try to exchange further, if you try to extend exchanges past the point when that first 1 or 2, that sort of 1 or 2 key punch combination is thrown, you also risk being thrown way out of position. Does it strike you as a style that's likely to age really effectively over time?
Yeah, you're not going to see Rafael Assunção doing that kind of thing because it doesn't make any sense.
It's a hard style, and again, Whittaker won the title and defended it with it. So I'm not knocking it as a quality. I'm saying it's a hard style to try to maintain. It really is. I think there's a lot of avenues for Robert Whittaker here. Like, as we said, Till's responses to the blitzes and entries of Jorge Masvidal, in a pretty brilliant performance from Masvidal where he figured out just about everything Till had. And after like 2.5 minutes of that fight, there was nothing that Darren Till had that Masvidal hadn't seen before. And he just had him pretty consummately figured out. I don't know if Till is active enough as a kicker to really kind of give Whittaker some pause at range the same way that Adesanya did. As you said, the left hook, that Till should just be a mark for that every night. And if Till just gets impatient and tries to enter with a big left hand, I have to assume Whittaker's at least been preparing for that shot. Whittaker's hard to hit clean to the chin in open space. So there are elements here and that really favor Whittaker. And I really came into this, like I said, I didn't want to pick Till just because of the trend. Just because I don't know where Whittaker's at, and I'm kind of throwing a fuck it pick on Darren Till, but I think that's what I'm going to end up doing, and I'm not happy about it. I would love to see Robert Whittaker win this fight, and I'd love to see him, get back on his feet and start fighting consistently again, because I think he's got a lot to offer, but it's just looking at the way his career has gone, I can't help but think that the margin for error with Robert Whittaker is so much narrower than it needs to be given the style that he tries to play. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, originally this fight was not this fight, but in March it was Jared Cannonier, and I think that's a significantly more worrying fight for Whittaker in terms of the margin of error, because Cannonier, he's as his name says, he wields cannons. And Whittaker, if he gets caught there, it's probably over, even just as a function of Cannonier hits really, really hard instead of Whittaker chin. Till, I'm not quite as worried in that sense, because Till's a puncher and he can, take advantage of the margin of error, but he's not a monstrous puncher like Cannonier or Romero. So I think that might be what swings me from I don't trust Robert Whittaker anymore to maybe Robert Whittaker can buy the time to figure Till out. But again, it might not even just be chin. It might just be he breaks his foot or breaks his ankle or breaks his knee or breaks his arm or breaks his entire rib cage. And nothing is certain with Robert Whittaker anymore. And it's so frustrating because Whittaker, I feel like Whittaker's going to go down as one of the most underrated champions ever in terms of skill, because you're looking at a guy who he beat Yoel Romero twice, but the caveat is, one, Yoel Romero wasn't great the first time in terms of striking, and people were like, oh, he's a pure wrestler. And the second time when he got even better at striking, it was, oh, Yoel Romero beat him. So you've got a guy who just really can't win if he doesn't win this fight. And after this, apparently Jack Hermanson wants Whittaker. I don't think that's tough for Whittaker at all. If anything, that should have been the comeback fight. But I'm going to go with Whittaker, but it's not a confident pick at all. I wish it were, but, there's too much of a skill differential for me to say confidently, but the decline chance is, going to absolutely screw it up.
The one thing that I will say is that I have made mistakes like this in the past with picking fights where I've leaned so far into the sort of trend discussion that I sort of ignore the bigger, technical questions of a fight, and that's, if that's a mistake, then that's on me. One thing I will say is that Robert Whittaker hasn't lost at middleweight except to an Israel Adesanya who had him perfectly figured out and just was operating at the height of his powers. It's important to remember that's the only loss that he's taken. Whittaker is not an easy fighter to beat. And I think just because Israel Adesanya made it look easy doesn't mean that it is easy for everybody else. So, keep that in mind, because there is a very good chance that Whittaker just makes me look stupid. And I hope he does. Robert, if you're listening, please make me look stupid. So I'm in the end I'm gonna side with the trend, but I don't bet on this fight. We say that sometimes. Don't bet on this fight. It's like,
Yeah, it's at evens. There's no value either side.
if Whittaker comes out just looking shot to pieces, I'm not gonna feel good about my analysis. And if Whittaker comes out and wins and makes it look easy, you're welcome for my advice to not bet on it because we're splitting. We're splitting our picks. Anyway, hope for the best in Robert Whittaker. Darren Till, he still doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. What was our third segment? We were going to talk about Wittman.
It was a Wittman question.
Okay, can you read the question for me?
Yeah, just a sec. It was something like, talk about the kinds of fighters that Trevor Wittman produces. So, after the Gaethje fight, I think we have a good idea. After Kamaru Usman and Rose Namajunas, there are some good samples there, I suppose. So, yeah, that's the question. Talk about the kinds of fighters that Trevor Wittman produces.
Good punching mechanics.
Yep.
This is a big one.
Very clear with Rose.
As Rose, even as far back as like Nate Marquardt, who has a lot of problems, but like Wittman as a coach does a great job teaching punching mechanics. I think it was Tuman in our group chat that mentioned how Gaethje's left hook has kind of gone from a more American kind of topside fist to more of a Russian, like, palm down sort of left hook. In terms of how he throws it, and just his weight distribution on his punches. He sits down, he's planted when he throws. I think Rose Namajunas is another good example of someone who can do that. Like, she did a lovely job of like check hooking and pivoting off when she fought Andrade the first time. For someone who, really had issues with any kind of striking early in her career. I think Wittman's great at that. Wittman is, as Conor Rebish has pointed out, he's an excellent cornerman, both in terms of advice and in terms of how much he cares about his fighters. He's a compassionate cornerman. You remember in the Marquardt fight against Kelvin Gastelum, Marquardt said he was done, and Wittman stopped the fight without a second thought. Didn't hesitate. Just called the fight immediately. That's not really technical analysis. It's just with the amount of shit corner and ref stoppages that we see in this sport, it's important that we give some credit to the one who's quite good at that. Would you agree, Sriram?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, both he and Elevation in general have put a premium on that. It's like, as you said, it's not something technical, but it's something that's very important to the longevity of a fighter. And I think that's another thing that kind of leads into something technical, which is Wittman's development of Justin Gaethje has been something more tuned towards longevity than like action. Because like, even if you look at the way Gaethje used to fight, right? I think I would have picked him pretty confidently over Donald Cerrone and Tony Ferguson. But the way that he's fighting now, it's something that it's not taking as much damage as he used to. And he's still, I don't know if I'd call him better, but he's fighting more carefully. And it's a very interesting strategic pivot for Gaethje to take. And I think Wittman's mostly responsible for that. It's a very smart camp, and they do some great things.
Wittman has, from what I can tell from an outsider's perspective, and I said this on Twitter as well, Wittman and Gaethje, from the looks of it, have a much better idea of how to approach Khabib than just about anybody else. And I realize we're saying this before the fight, so there's a chance that Gaethje could come in with a terrible strategy or just, whatever. It can fall apart in a number of different ways. But I want to say that, like, he brought in Kamaru Usman to spar with and train with Justin Gaethje, and they were practicing, stopping chain wrestling. They were practicing sprawls. They were practicing, I think they kind of worked some time in the clinch. There is no better analog for Khabib Nurmagomedov as far as training than Kamaru Usman. Like that is the perfect person that you should pick to go if you're trying to prepare for Khabib. Like that is the perfect training partner. So he's very smart, and I think one of the things Wittman does well is not just in terms of strategy, but in-fight adjustments as well. I wrote a big metagame piece 2 weeks ago about adjustments in MMA and how hard they are. One of the things I said is that when you talk about adjustments, you have to consider, it's not just the ability to make adjustments, but can the fighter commit to the adjustments? And so some of this is like, I don't really know if Rose is that committed and adjusting fighter. So even when Trevor Wittman sort of gives her advice in the middle of a fight, I don't know how much she can really take that to heart. She can be cowed a bit by pressure and so forth. Justin Gaethje, on the other hand, is someone who listens all the time. And you could see that in the Tony Ferguson performance. Like there's, the proof is in the pudding there. Like every time Wittman told him anything, Gaethje was receiving the information. Take 10% off the shots after he got knocked down in the second round. No problem. Never happened again, and he just kept breaking Tony down. I need you to, last time you did this, you got stopped, Gaethje, twice. And he just stayed completely sharp the whole time. Told him to look for the check hook. Told him to set up the kicks. Gaethje followed suit immediately. I'm sorry if we're making this more of like a Gaethje and Wittman pairing conversation, but I think when you get a coach who sort of has a star pupil like that, and we see all of these skills come to the fold, kind of like a Dillashaw Barao, with Dillashaw and Dwayne Ludwig type thing, it's hard not to look at that example and be like, this is exactly what the sort of training, coach-fighter relationship could be. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, Gaethje is a great example of the things that Trevor Wittman does best. I think you could even look at some of Kamaru Usman's things against Jorge Masvidal, because that was his first camp with Wittman, I believe. And he did some, pairing of kicks. He hit the body very actively. He did that against Covington too. But in general, the way that Wittman has been developing his fighters with the good punching mechanics and the strategic efficiency, it's a very smart way to fight that'll benefit a lot of people. And it kind of sucks that everyone can't be with Wittman, but that's kind of the appeal of Wittman, is that only a few can, because he puts a lot of time into them. So Trevor Wittman, he's brilliant, and we're gonna take probably a bigger look at that.
Who else is under his tutelage? I'm trying to see, because I like the examples that jumped out of my mind were Namajunas and Gaethje, but like who else does he train? Do you know anybody offhand?
Yeah, most of the guys I associate with Wittman are actually Team Elevation, because Gaethje trains in both places. But let's see.
Brandon Thatch.
Oh yeah, Thatch was a good striker, so that works.
And I think Thatch had his own his own issues. Okay, so it says
that's
here,
not a coaching thing.
Yeah, I don't really know. Yeah, I don't really know exactly how much credence to give this list. One of the lists it says Stipe Miocic sometimes trains under Trevor Wittman. I haven't ever seen him in his corner, but I guess that's an example. I'm not really, again, I don't really know. The one that really jumps out is Justin Gaethje and obviously Rose Namajunas. But it is notable that like those two fighters made gigantic strides, both technically, mechanically, and strategically under his tutelage. Wittman is he does sort of feel like the gold standard. And if Gaethje pulls it off against Khabib, then I think Trevor's got to be everybody's pick for coach of the year. I don't think that would even be much of a discussion. But yeah, like I've never heard anything come out of Trevor Wittman's mouth that didn't make sense, or I didn't sound like educated, or that ended up proving to be true in some capacity. He's just he is kind of the gold standard at the moment. It's like him and Behrman at City Kickboxing. So.
Yep. So what? Anything else coming up? And is there anything else on that Whittaker card? I don't think there is.
I mean, fuck me. You really want to talk about
Shogun
versus Gustafsson?
Yeah, let's not.
Because I don't.
Okay, I think that's it.
Do you have anything coming out this week?
I don't think I do. I think I've started something long term on Joseph Benavidez because that's it's a sad tale, but has to be told.
Has
You
to be
got
told.
anything?
I just had an article on Brad Riddell go up yesterday. Brad Riddell is in.
Backman.
Yeah, exactly. Bring him back. I think a lot of us have high hopes for Brad Riddell as he's a City Kickboxing alum. And I think that if he keeps improving and fighting consistently, he could really make a run at the lightweight elite, which would be terrific. I have another metagame piece like on tap. I haven't started it, but I've kind of formatted the thing. And so I'm not sure. I was gonna try to do one more for the month of July, like one more article. I'll take a look at stuff. I'm not really sure. Nothing's really jumped out as like I really want to write about this. So I guess I'll just have to wait and see. But I got through two articles that I'd kind of been sitting on for a little while, which was the metagame piece and then the Riddell piece. So, who knows what's gonna come after that. But
Yeah, I've
thank
kind
you
of
everybody
slacked
for
hard
joining
since
us.
June.
Next week, are we doing another one this week? I know Kyle wanted to do one about
Oh
BJ
no.
Penn, our
Yeah, we need to
favorite
see about that
our
because the
favorite
timing hasn't
lightweight.
worked out.
Yeah, yeah, we'll see. We should be back next week. What the hell is next? Is there another pay-per-view? Next pay-per-view's in August. Do we get a week off? I don't know what's next.
No, it's home Aldana.
Oh God, really?
Yep, August
Is
1st,
there
home
any? Is there
Aldana.
any? Is there anything on there that we should care about?
I think the co-main event is Brunson
Brunson
versus Shabazian.
Shabazian.
Okay, do I care about that? I don't think I care about that.
It says there's. Oh, no. Luque versus Brent. I mean, no,
Uh,
not really.
I don't want to talk about current Luke. That's just sad.
Yeah, wow. And then do we get a week off? So this
Is there
is
something on the
the
page?
August. No, nope. Next is Lewis versus Oleinik.
Oh my god. Oh my god. Did they seriously
Oh,
not give Burgos and Emmett a main event for Lewis versus Olenek?
no, we don't actually have a week off in a while. Like we're going straight to mid-August, which is going to be the next pay-per-view.
But do we
Which
have things to talk about? That might be the real week off.
Miocic versus Cormier 3. Oh boy, it's gonna be
Gonna be
fun.
lit.
Yeah, in case anyone's still wondering, I still fucking hate DC, so I have a lot to say there. Thank you guys for joining us. Please stay tuned to the fight site. You can check out Hyperfly's their grappling gear. Go down to the bottom of the fight site page and click the link. Check out all the stuff that we are releasing on, like weekly, monthly basis. The fight site on Twitter. You can check out Sriram at SriramM You can check out me at DMarty77 and follow our whole fight site staff. Thank you guys so much and stay safe.